The reason I think that a black person kills a white person, we have riots, a white person kills a black person, we don't have anything. Fundamentally, black people are chattel, disposable.
We have some of the highest rates of domestic abuse and femicide in all of Europe. So if we're going to say, let us deport people because there's a chance that a dangerous man might get through, it would be well within the rights of every country in Europe and beyond to say, well, every white, Northern Irish man should now be banned from travelling as well.
The UK case has been a key example in the kind of transnational far right. Figures like Elon Musk and Tommy Robinson effectively coordinating these attacks and these racist pogroms.
Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. Are we set for a summer of unrest on our streets? That's the fear following a night of violence in Belfast that saw houses, cars and a bus set on fire and ethnic minority families hounded out of their homes. It was prompted by a horrific knife attack in the north of the city, but stoked by social media, including posts by Tommy Robinson and Elon Musk. The alleged attacker was a refugee from Sudan, and anger over immigration has been the starting point for a number of riots over the last year, though driven by online disinformation and inflammatory rhetoric from politicians and far-right campaigners. So, is further chaos inevitable, or can calm be restored? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by author and academic Robert Topinka, who is researching how reactionary digital politics shape public culture, from Belfast by crime and security journalist Allison Morris, and by former senior police officer Victor Olisa. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. Alison, I want to start with you in Northern Ireland. We can't say a huge amount about the awful attack itself, as the suspect has now been charged. But there's so much talk, people are angry and people are afraid, both of which is justified. But how do you assess what you saw last night?
So, as you say, the suspect is now in custody, and that, I think, what we've seen is the PSNI tried to do, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, tried to do something that other police forces haven't done in the past, where they have made very little comment in the wake of this attack, and then you see bad faith actors coming in and putting disinformation, misinformation in the public domain. Instead, by noon on Tuesday, they come out and said that this man was from Sudan, that he had travelled through Paris into Dublin and then across the common travel area into Belfast, and had been granted a 5-year temporary visa in the UK. All of that was in the public domain in the hope that would stop then the sort of spread of lies, and it didn't even help. You put all that out there, and what happened then was using social media, and prompted, I think, and egged on by the like of, I knew when I woke up yesterday morning and seen that Tommy Robinson had joined in and posted about this awful attack, that things were going to kick off. I think it's, the words of Bretton Bacon, there's no situation can't be more dismal, cannot be made worse by the arrival of the like of Robinson. But what happened was social media sites, which have been used in the past to orchestrate violence around maybe the Brexit negotiations, the Loyalist flag protests, they sort of reactivate at times like this and start publishing misinformation, but also calling people onto the streets. And calling people onto the streets is great if you can say that you can control them and that you can control peaceful protest. And peaceful protest is, the cornerstone of any democracy. And there were peaceful protests last night in some parts of Northern Ireland, but it was inevitable. If you get hundreds of young men, and I was at one of the sites where the protest started, I was in my car on the phone, just yards from where it gathered. They advertised them for 7 o'clock. At 5 to 7, dozens and dozens of young guys in sports clothes with masks over their face and their hoods up started to block roads, set fire to bins, and then the trouble started. It got really bad, I suppose, in parts of East Belfast, where they were actually going door to door in houses where people were pointing out where foreign migrant families lived, and they were smashing the windows, they were putting bins and rocks through windows, setting fire to homes. And on one occasion, there's an awful image of a very young family with a primary school aged child having to be loaded into the back of an armoured police Land Rover as their house burst into flames behind them, and they are wearing the clothes on their back. That is all they were able to leave their properties with. We were told today by the Chief Constable that a 2-month-old baby is the youngest person who has been displaced from their home as a result of these actions. There are hospital appointments being cancelled because our very important foreign migrant healthcare workers who keep the NHS in Northern Ireland afloat are too afraid to come into work and are taking days off because they're now in hiding. The public transport has now been switched off for the night. There's no buses or no trains. And a lot of people, as you know, rely on that to get to work. The chaos that went on last night it was full of hatred. It was wanton vandalism. And I have covered those riots for 25 years. But in the past, they were an interface and they were sectarian and they were people fighting with each other because of religious and political differences. But what I have seen in the past maybe 3 years is that hate is transferable. And if you can hate someone because they're of a different religion or of a different political persuasion, it's very easy to direct that hate onto someone because they're a different colour.
The hate as you describe it, and it's hard to describe it in any other way, but we still have people talking about how it's an expression of legitimate concerns, of how, this is because people aren't listened to about their concerns about immigration. What's your assessment of that?
I think people have legitimate concerns about the common travel area, and we have an open border between north and south. And look, the people who would be, online rabble-rousing in England are the same people who promoted Brexit. And they knew when Brexit happened that we were going to have a problem with the fact that we were going to have a border between north and south. And that was always going to be exploited, whether it be in terms of goods and smuggling and financial reasons or in terms of immigration. They didn't care about that then. They are all of a sudden caring about it now. That border can't have an infrastructure on it. It's not designed. It's a wobbly line of over 300 miles. It is police to a point. I have been on a bus coming from Dublin Airport that's been stopped at the border and immigration have boarded the bus. But that common travel area, there's people who live and work on both sides of that border. They might live in the north and work in the south, or live in the south and work in the north. They go to school and church and work and all sorts of everything on both sides. But if we're going to talk about immigration and controlling that, well, we can talk about the ports and the airports and how we do that. But the fact is, and this is a fact, that Northern Ireland is one of the most dangerous places to live as a woman. We have some of the highest rates of domestic abuse and femicide in all of Europe. I have sat in the past few weeks in court cases where women have been mutilated in their own homes. The family of Natalie McNally had to listen as the court was told she was stabbed 3 times and her face put into a dog bowl, head down to humiliate her. And that was by a man from Northern Ireland. So if we're going to say, let us stop all of this migration and deport people because there's a chance that a dangerous man might get through, well, then it would be well within the rights of every country in Europe and beyond to say, well, every white Northern Irish man should now be banned from travelling as well, just in case one of the dangerous ones get through, because we have plenty of our own. And I think that for anyone to say that to go and put a hard-working family who have been here in Northern Ireland 10, 15 years, you're contributing to society, to go and burn them from their home, to leave their children standing in just their shoes and pyjamas because one man committed a violent act. Why are we collectively punishing a whole population?
Victor Olisa, Allison makes a good point that there's something very specific about these sort of cases that we are seeing where an ethnic minority attacks a white person and there are riots, there are protests, and we don't see it the other way around necessarily. There was a case last week of a young Saudi boy killed by a white man in Cambridge. There was no uproar. What's your take on that?
So one person, I mean, let's call it what it is. And Police Scotland, I think, have been brave in actually saying people have been attacked for the colour of their skin yesterday in Glasgow. And that's what's happening here. So one person gets attacked. We might label that person as Sudanese, a Nigerian, a Congolese, but that person is black. And all black communities, regardless of where they're from, are stigmatised. They're all doing something wrong. Yeah. And so we attack them. The reason I think that, a black person kills a white person, we have riots, a white person kills a black person, we don't have anything, there's a combination of things. Fundamentally, black people are chattel, are disposable. Yeah, society will allow us to do with them what we want. Talking about, reading some of the reports, neighbours pointed out houses where migrants might live. Now, we're conflating migration with colour. That's what we're doing here. Yeah, we're not talking about migration because migration cuts across nationality, colour, and everything else. So we're talking about migration and colour. So when neighbours start doing that, they permit the damage, the injury of these people. When politicians retrospectively realise they've said too much, which has created an environment where it's okay to be angry, have a sense of a level of cold rage, to create that environment. And when your neighbours, who actually, some of whom get on with, black people living next to them, all of a sudden start to thinking, well, my neighbours are rioting. These people are coming in to riot. I'm not going to stick out. I'll be silent. Or even worse still, I'll stick with them. So the point I'm trying to make is, over the years, we've allowed a group of people, black people, it's acceptable to treat them the way you treat them. We can always find an excuse for doing so. When they should be protected, they're not protected. And when, retrospectively, people in position of authority start to say things are positive, it's almost apologetic. Well, they're running our hospitals, they're running our service system, they're running parts of our infrastructure won't work. So please don't hurt them because they're really important for us. And those people who are doing those good work, well, really, they're like us. But the rest of them, fill your boots. And I think until we get into a position where those in position of power and authority seriously acknowledge that there is a race problem. It doesn't matter where you go. I mean, at the moment, we're talking about Northern Ireland. 20, 30 years ago, we're talking about the UK, and we talked about London as if London's the only place where there are black people who get discriminated, but it doesn't happen in their own countries. Until we accept there's a fundamental problem in terms of the way we look at certain people, the way that we accept things to happen to them, and the way we're reluctant to acknowledge those difficulties, we're never going to move on. If I just use one small example, in the area in which I work as a police officer, 5 years ago when George Floyd was murdered, there was rightly indignation by the senior police officers. The National Police Chief Council decided they needed to do something, albeit it was across the water, do something here. And they came up with actually putting together a race action plan, which will actually, the intention of that race action plan is to improve policing for black people. 5 years on, we're still pontificating about the wording of the plan. Now, if that can't get a social institution as powerful as the police to make some tangible change, then what is going to do that?
But of course, the dialogue at the moment about that race action plan is that it is in effect discriminating against white people. And we saw that argument made about the terrible killing of Henry Novak. It is yet to be decided in any official investigation exactly what happened there. But a number of things are clear, as you say. They're conflating race, immigration, illegal immigration, legal migration.
I certainly find it astonishing that we've had the Race Relations Act, we've had the Equalities Act, have not changed people's fundamental views and the way they look at black people, but we've got a plan put together by the National Police Chiefs Council has made such a tremendous difference to people's lives. Come on.
Robert, what role, in your view, is social media playing in all of this?
It plays a huge role, and I think it plays kind of two roles at once. On the one hand, as Allison pointed out, it sort of fills a void. If there's not immediate information about who was responsible for the attack, there are bad actors who will sort of fill that space with misinformation and disinformation. But it's not just that they're able to do that in the moment. They're also part of a broader, more long-term strategy. Tommy Robinson in 2023 went to Ireland and produced a documentary he called Plantation 2, Rise of the Celts, which is his kind of reference to the British or the English plantation system in the 16th and 17th century. And he was framing migration as a new version of effectively colonialism. So he's been talking about this for a long time. It's not just that they spring into action in the moment, it's that they're ready for it. And the UK case has been a key example in the kind of transnational far right. So you have Elon Musk posting about it. You have Andy Ngo, who's a right-wing commentator based in America, posting about it. Tim Pool, another right-wing commentator. So it's become a kind of point of contention, a kind of key trope among the right that Britain is falling. So you have this complicated situation where you have politics and history specific to Belfast, but But then you also have figures like Elon Musk and Tommy Robinson effectively coordinating these attacks and these racist pogroms. Elon Musk is posting...
He's posting locations,
He's posting locations. If you look at Tommy Robinson's X, it's a sort of live feed of where the protests are happening. He's egging on these attacks on HMOs with ethnic minorities living in houses of multiple occupancies, which he is claiming are housing invaders. That's the language he uses. And this is language that Suella Braverman uses, that Sia Youssef uses. So social media becomes a place to kind of coordinate attention, to stoke anger and outrage. Then it gets picked up by sort of mainstream politicians who see this as kind of resonant language that can explain something for people. And so we're in a situation here where we're trying to explain, violence is down, migration is down. We're trying to give the facts behind this, but the people who are involved in these conversations are not interested in facts. I mean, you can look at the Southport riots in 2024, which are still framed as anti-migrant riots, even though the attacker was not an immigrant. But that carried the story. That became the framework. So what people like Rupert Lowe are doing when he posted an image of this horrible attack and said millions must go, he's turning this into an explanation for what's going wrong in the world. And he's creating a framework for people to say these are confusing attacks, this is violence, this is horrific. Images are circulating very quickly. The same thing happened with the Henry Novak case where Nigel Farage gave a public address about it, and in the middle of his own address, he cut to this video that perhaps people weren't expecting to see, and then we're seeing these very distressing images, and then he says, let me explain this for you, let me tell you what's going wrong, let me give you an explanation for your sense of discontent.
So who benefits? You see the terrible things that happened in Belfast last night. We've seen rioting after the Southport attacks, terrible destruction in many parts of the country. Who benefits from people like, what does Elon Musk gain from this?
Well, he gains two things. I mean, I think if you look at his tweets and what he says, he's committed to white nationalist causes. So he gains ideological momentum. He wants to change the way we talk about race, the way we talk about migration. He has talked about what's happening in the UK as he sees it as a civilizational battle, as civilizational decline. But he also gains money. Right? His network, X, is effectively a kind of white nationalist organizing tool and is also an attention economy tool. So Rupert Lowe, in reports he submitted about money he's made as an MP, made £72,000 just posting on X. So people have financial incentives. They have incentives of gaining attention and momentum for their cause. And these two things are a potent combination. You have ideologically committed actors who can make money off of it and who can change mainstream conversation in this country.
The question is, what is done about it? What can be done about it?
Well, it's very difficult because we can debunk it all day, as I just did with the Southport attacker, but it doesn't matter because that's the frame. So we need people offering an alternative explanation. Unfortunately, it's not enough to do what Keir Starmer has done, and what he should do is call for calm and call for proper processes to take place, because people don't trust institutions, right? They don't trust, unfortunately, the police. They don't trust the media. They don't trust the government. So someone outside of the far right needs to offer an explanation for why things are getting worse and how they could become better. And that's lacking right now. And really the only place you're seeing it in a coordinated way are these reactionary, often white nationalist actors.
I mean, many people who follow Elon Musk would say, and him too, presumably, this is not a white nationalist platform. It's legitimate concerns. It's that phrase.
They do say that. I mean, some of what Elon Musk says is he will say white civilization is better. He says those sorts of things. Tommy Robinson will say it's not about race, but then he is posting about ethnic minorities in houses and how they should be attacked effectively. But they do have this ability to frame it as a kind of cultural problem rather than as a race problem. I do think what you're seeing right now, particularly with Rupert Lowe, who is more openly ethnic nationalist as opposed to civic nationalist, is that the racist language is less and less cloaked, less and less hidden than it used to be, and becoming more and more prominent.
Allison, Nigel Farage has said in the last hour or so that the vast majority of people on the streets last night are not far right, they're not extremists, they're just angry and they're afraid.
No, that's not true. And when you talked about that Tommy Robinson documentary, the majority of these attacks are taking place in very hardline loyalist areas. These are, young men who are the ancestors of the plantation. So to say that they are being colonised when their ancestors were the colonisers is a very strange role to take. Look, we didn't have an awful lot of migration in Northern Ireland we had a conflict. Nobody wanted to live here. The people who lived here didn't even want to live here. So you weren't getting people coming from other places. So this is quite new. We're a very, very white society. Our police force is incredibly white. There's not a lot of diversity here, and people who have came have only really just started coming since the Good Friday Agreement. So this is relatively new, in terms of that. And I don't want to paint this as an awful, inhospitable place, because it's not. These are a minority, and the majority of the people who are in the streets, they're very young men who are being influenced online constantly by the Tommy Robinsons, the Conor McGregors, the Tates, all of those sort of people who are in their algorithms constantly polluting their minds with, they don't read newspapers. They're not, they're not going to listen to us. They'll never listen to this podcast. But they're getting their misinformation from those places. And it's very easy to say to young men who traditionally from loyalist communities have very low educational achievement and therefore very little prospects when it comes to further education and employment, that the problems that exist in your life are not caused by you. They're caused by that person 2 doors down from you. You convince very, very poor white people that very poor or hardworking brown or black people are responsible for the problems caused by billionaire white men. And that is what is happening. And it's happening quite successfully in terms of how social media is used. And, I believe that Elon Musk did not just blindly buy Twitter. He did it for a reason, to control a lot of those narratives and what's put into the domain. And, I know mothers who have 15, 16-year-old boys who say if their child is, say, into the gym or into fitness or into anything like that, they look at their computer and all of a sudden they're being bombarded with this far right, men should be men, far macho, misogynist, patriarchal nonsense. And that's what's being done to a lot of these young men. That is no excuse for their behaviour. But if you think about, there's no logic to a lot of it. I mean, we have a man from Sudan, and the PSNI came out at 12 o'clock in the day to say this was a man he was originally from Sudan, this is the road he took, this is his path, he was here illegally, all of that. And the next thing you know, you have a Turkish barber's being set on fire. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason or link to what is happening here. It is just wildly attacking anyone who might look slightly different.
You touch on it a little, this idea of poverty and poverty of opportunity for some of these young men who were out on the streets last night. There are politicians who say, there are concerns around services, around housing, around jobs, and that has to be laid on the door of the politicians, doesn't it?
Well, it's politicians who make these decisions and who make these laws and legislation and who direct the funds to where they're meant to be directed to. It's not the person who, owns the barber shop or the car worker or, the person working in the agri-food sector or any of those people. It is the politicians who are making these laws in terms of housing provision, educational provision, all of those things. The person who was attacked and who was in hospital being treated for very serious injuries, the people who would have been treating him on their 12-hour shift would have came from all around the world. There would have been people from Northern Ireland and also people from every corner of the world. And, I thought last night as I was standing watching houses being bricked and set on fire and people fleeing for their lives, how many of those people that were treating that man came out and couldn't go home after their 12-hour shift, after trying to save the life of the person they're now rioting for. But what did happen, and I don't want this to sound hopeless, is there was also people who were getting phone calls from their neighbours saying, look, don't go out. Tell me what you need. Do the kids need milk? Do they need anything for school? I'll go and do it. Do you want to bring the children over and put them to bed in my house and they'll be okay here? There was people who were, sent in, doing a taxi service and going and collecting nurses and everyone else from their place of work to get them home safely. So that, this is not a place full of racists and it's inhospitable, but there is a minority who are being controlled and controlled very well through false narratives. Some of it is just misinformation because people are fed a diet of that constantly, but a lot of it is very deliberate disinformation set out to cause unrest among communities. And we are a place that knows an awful lot about unrest among different communities.
And you also know an awful lot about distrust in the police historically. Victor, it's very clear yesterday, the PSNI chief came out and appealed for calm very, very directly to young people. It's easy for young people to get carried away with the tide by looking online and and be persuaded by people who know nothing about Northern Ireland. But clearly, a number of people did not listen. As a former police officer, what do they do next?
They continue giving the message, as Alison just said, these young people won't listen to, as she said, rightly, wrongly, they may not watch this podcast. So we need to recognize that. But some of them may watch this podcast. Some of them may talk to their friends about thinking differently. Some of them will listen to the police. But if the police only give those messages sporadically and is not consistent, the language is not consistent. If you're going to show humility, you need to show humility consistently, not at times when you're reacting, because people see through that. Yeah. And when those messages come from male senior officers, it's almost patriarchal. I'm telling you not to do this because it's wrong. Of course they know it's wrong. So how do institutions get into a position where they send conciliatory, advisory, inclusive messages consistently? Because we all know, the police is always going to be, if it wanted to, use force and use force expertly. Yeah, that's always there. Those young men in the streets know that. The politicians know that. If the police have to deal with those situations in a forceful way, they can do it. They can do it legitimately, and they can do it with the support of the majority of the community. But what people don't see and don't hear is the police being really conciliatory, showing some humility, showing some care, and doing so consistently. That's when the message will start getting through, because people will then say, whose side do I want to be on? Do I want to be on the side of the institution that's here to protect us, or do I want to be on the side of the minorities that are trying to use us to create harm, damage, violence to our neighbours?
I mean, you became really key part of the Met after the 2011 riots. How do you even begin to try and prevent those things escalating?
I think it's not just the police. I mean, and if I just use my experience as a microcosm of what can be done, and the police are there as facilitators, and as I said, we always knew, and the public knew, that if we had to use force, we will use force, but we're here to protect. How do we work with you to protect your communities? How do we work with you to understand the people in your communities? How do we work with you to give some of those people who you might be misinformed about and you think are a problem, to understand them more? That's a lot of work that can be done very quickly, but ideally be done consistently. So I don't think that the environment we have at the moment, the police can't do that, and the people who are actually governing the police want them to be forceful. We've now moved from a state where police forces used to be called police forces. They moved to police service. The rhetoric is enforce, get back to the enforcement role. You can't wear two hats at the same time and actually be an enforcement unit and a service when the actions that you deliver shows you as being an enforcement unit, and people are not going to buy into that.
Robert, is all of that any match for social media and the bad actors on there?
I'm afraid it's not. It's very difficult. I mean, I think police have a very difficult job right now with the way things are being framed, this trope of two-tier policing that circulates, which, again, doesn't stand up to the facts, but becomes emotionally resonant for people. And I think, we're talking about young people being convinced of certain things on social media. It's worth saying it's not just young people. Everyone's on social media. Older people might be looking at Facebook more often, but they're seeing Facebook groups with this sort of content as well. And I think politicians have not yet understood what they're up against. They think they can debunk things. They think they can, increase regulation on social media, which is important. But what really needs to be offered is some kind of counter argument, an emotionally resonant one that explains what's going on. Saying, well, we'll be tough on migration too, is not going to stop the problem, right? Part of the reason Tommy Robinson is ready to politicize these attacks is because net migration is falling, right? So this is not about reality. They're not reality-based actors. It's emotional. And if we want to contend with what's happening with politics right now, we need better emotional stories. We can't just ape what the far right is saying and do a nicer version of it. We have to take it on, head on, and counter it.
And Alison, last word to you, if you would. I mean, how optimistic are you that what we saw last night won't be repeated in Northern Ireland?
I am not too optimistic at all right now, which is why I am in work in a pair of trainers rather than a pair of normal shoes, because I imagine I'm going to be on the streets again tonight. Look, there's people who, especially in the summer months, and they have just wound these young people up, and they then release them out, and they're causing real harm. And the thing is, they're causing real harm in their own communities. Family homes that are much needed in a place with the housing shortage are now destroyed and cannot be lived in. People have fled. The damage to the reputation of here is awful, but I do think that there is a way and we can tackle it, and there are people who don't get enough credit. And I suppose the last word I would say is to the youth workers who are low paid in very insecure jobs, and I watched them last night out putting themselves in the front line and standing in front of those children and begging them to go home and not to get themselves criminal records and get themselves in trouble. And we have to give credit that there are people out there trying.
Okay, Allison Morris, Victor Olisa, Robert Topinka, thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you. Well, that is it from this episode of the Fourcast. Until next time, goodbye.